I just want to point out, not to delegitimize any overseas mission efforts that are happening, but just so people are aware and cognizant, there is a great harvest to be had here in the United States. And I know that the gospel has come to the States in a way that it has not in many, many parts of the world. I mean, I believe it's the case that 3 billion or so people in this world have not heard the gospel in any capacity. I just want to remind people that there are a lot of those people here in the States. Now, I think there is this kind of common understanding that if you live in the United States, at one point or another, you've heard the gospel. And, therefore, if you die and go to hell, it's kind of on you because you didn't respond to the word. Okay, based on what experience I have, just because you live in the U.S. does not mean you have any idea what the name of Jesus means or any idea about the story of the gospel. We cannot afford to assume that about Americans.
Yeah, we're definitely in a post-Christian society here, meaning that, there was a day in which a huge percentage, 99%, I don't know what the numbers were. I'm sure there's somebody did a survey at some point, but a huge percent of people did understand the Bible on some level. It was required reading often in their upbringing, and so they had some familiarity with it. We certainly are not in that situation now, and there is a great mission field here, and it doesn't need to be neglected. I think the difference is the prosperity that we have here in the U.S. We just mentioned you can't, what did you say?
Hungry heart has no ears.
Hungry heart has no ears. Well, you might could say a full heart has no ears. A full stomach has no ears either. From the standpoint of when we're overly prosperous, we don't see a need of God, and we don't want to entertain all the things that we talked about in that first podcast on this topic. And so too much prosperity closes us down to the gospel as well, and I think that's where we're at here in the U.S. I think maybe the ugliness of our culture will open people's eyes back up to the need for the gospel. But certainly we don't need to neglect the preaching of the gospel here, the sharing of the gospel here. Mission, there is such a thing as, American missions. And that when we say the word missions, that can take many forms. Ultimately, to me, it ties in with the Great Commission of sharing the gospel. That could be through feeding for the hungry or caring for the less fortunate among us. It could just be evangelizing. So it takes many forms, but it certainly can happen here. But it is also important to go overseas and do that same work, because the souls that live outside the U.S. are just as valuable to God as the souls that live inside the U.S. And, we, sometimes our puffed upness of being Americans, think we're more important than anybody else in the world. But, we're all created equal in God's eyes.
Yes.
The person that lives in the darkest spot in Africa is just as valuable to him as we are. And so there is definitely a need for, and we should be supportive of, foreign missions.
Yes. Well, I think you just said something that is huge and may inform the way we go about missions, which is that you can be so full that you have no ears for the gospel. We are very comfortable in this society, and I think that it could be the case that the reason that we are commanded so frequently to go to the poor and to the marginalized and the outcasts in society is because they may be more ready to hear the gospel, because they are more disillusioned with this world. Now, it's not that the world is genuinely any better if you have a lot of money, right? It's still a fallen place that is ultimately passing away. But those riches can be deceptive, right? They can convince people in the church as well as people without that the need for God is kind of null. I've spoken to a number of homeless people in the last several years. I find that they're very ready to discuss God. What I think it is? I think it's that the ego has been stripped away from them. When you're begging on the side of the road, your ego, your facade, it's been stripped away. And can I be frank?
Please.
I enjoy speaking to homeless people because it's almost like it's a mode of conversation that is not accessible among higher status people, because there's too much ego among us,
elites,
more well-to-do, more well-to-do people, and the conversation is so much more about maintaining our facades. But if you can talk to someone who's had that stripped down, you can go immediately to the real stuff of life, right? And so that in and of itself may be an argument in favor of humanitarian efforts. And I will just say, so that we don't neglect the rich of this world, some people are so rich that they come to the end of riches. And they feel that they have no more left to attain. And then they realize, oh, turns out all of this was empty the whole time. And I still have a longing in my heart that I had when I was a 15-year-old dreaming of being a billionaire or a millionaire. That is also a ripe harvest, I would say.
Yeah, there's hearts ready for God across the spectrum. I just think you find them grouped oftentimes at the lower end of the spectrum. The truth of the matter is, until we have an eternal perspective, we have no need of God. If we're not hungry, if we're comfortable, if the bills are getting paid, we got a place to live, we got a car to drive, we got a job, we don't have cancer, death is not imminent, something tragic is not happening to us. We don't really need God. And, that is unfortunately how most people live. And here in the U.S. I'm talking about. And so that's what makes evangelism so hard, is people don't feel that need of God. Quite honestly, it's what makes our job so hard here at Innerfire, is people are comfortable. They don't see the need to live out the Word, to take the Word, to study it, and understand that if I would do this, it could change my course. It could change the course of my family. It could change the course of everything that I touch and extend out to reaches I can't even really imagine. There's a spectrum there. But there is definitely more openness when people are struggling and they get disillusioned with this world and they're wondering if there's anything better.